The gospel passage for this week is from Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourself to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." So this passage picks up immediately after the passage that we looked at last week. And just as a quick refresher, last week, the disciples asked Jesus to increase their faith. And in response, Jesus tells them if they had faith, even the size of a tiny mustard seed, they could do miraculous things, like uproot a tree and replant it in the ocean. And after that, he went on to make a comparison between being a disciple and being a slave or a servant of God. And the takeaway from the passage was that even a tiny bit of faith can be extremely powerful, and that being a disciple often means doing mundane, day-to-day tasks of faithfulness. So being a disciple isn't necessarily flashy, and it's not really about doing miracles. And now in this passage, for today, Jesus is moving on towards Jerusalem. And according to the text, he's in a region between Galilee and Samaria. And to be honest, that doesn't really make sense, because Jesus would either have been in Galilee or Samaria. There's no region in between those. So that's an interesting detail. So Jesus, in this, wherever he is, he enters a village, and a group of 10 people with skin diseases approaches him. But they keep their distance from him out of respect for the law. But they do call out to him and they ask, "Jesus, Master, please have mercy on us." And Jesus does have mercy on them. He tells them to go to the priests. And that is what was required by the law. So the priests were the ones who inspected people with these various skin diseases, and they would determine if those diseases were healed or not healed, and they would pronounce the men clean or unclean. And so on the way to be inspected by the priests, the lepers are healed. But one of these healed men turns back and he shouts a praise to God, and he lays down at Jesus's feet and he thanks him. And interestingly, it's only at this moment that Luke tells us that the man was a Samaritan. Now, I'm not sure if anybody remembers, but a couple of months ago, we talked about the fraught relationship between the Jews and the Samaritans. And so according to Samaritan history, so according to how the Samaritans saw themselves, when the Assyrians came in and conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, they chose to leave some of those Israelites behind in the area instead of deporting them. And those remaining Israelites, the Assyrians called Samaritans. And the Samaritans over time considered themselves to be the rightful heirs to legitimate worship of Yahweh. So they considered themselves to be the true Israelites. But the Jews of the southern kingdom thought that the Samaritans were actually descendants of Assyrian colonizers So they considered the Samaritan religion a false version of Judaism. So these two groups had competing claims to religious legitimacy. And one of the major conflicts that they had to do with where each group thought that the temple should be. So obviously the Jews of the southern kingdom, they considered Jerusalem to be the place where God had told them to build the temple. But the Samaritans believed that the temple should be on Mount Gerizim. So there was a lot going on between these two groups. And to us, sort of the differences about where the temple should be, that might sound like an unimportant detail to us. But the rightful place of worship and how to worship correctly, these were central tenets of Judaism. I mean, if you read some of the law, you will see how important it was that they were worshiping in the right place and that they were worshiping in the correct ways. And so this was a bitter disagreement between these two groups. So back to today's passage, the one leper to turn back and to praise God and to lay at Jesus's feet happens to be a Samaritan. Or another way of saying this is, in the eyes of most Jews, he would have been a heretic. So the heretic is the one who praises God and thanks God. So what are we supposed to make of this? The first thing that sticks out to me is that Jesus did not consider whether the lepers were Samaritans or Jews when he chose to heal them. He didn't consider whether their theologies or their ideas about God were correct or incorrect. And I'm positive that he had opinions about this. But for him, it was about mercy. Now, clearly, the lepers thought that there was a chance that Jesus could actually heal them. So they had a certain amount of faith in him. But part of me also thinks, they could have just been desperate and would take help any way that they could get it. Either way, that was enough for Jesus. The fact that they asked made them worthy of mercy and healing. And I think that this is a really important example for us to follow. And I know that we all probably agree with this sentiment in the abstract. But what also I think sticks out is the really personal nature of the conflict between the Samaritans and the Jews. And to me, it seems almost like a family conflict. So similar, let's say, to the historical conflicts between Roman Catholics and Protestants, or Roman Catholics and the Orthodox Church. Groups that have commonalities and shared histories and shared convictions and beliefs, but that also have really bitter disagreements, like family conflicts and resentments. And I think we probably all know that family conflicts can be the most heated and the most brutal because they are the most personal. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's how we should see this conflict between Samaritans and Jews. And within this conflict and context, Jesus's approach is one of mercy. His approach is to embody the character and the love of God, even to people who would have been considered his enemies. And again, what also strikes me is that the Samaritan, right, the heretic, the one with the wrong or incorrect beliefs, he's the one who really seems to get it, to grasp the fundamental underlying dynamic here, which is the love of God, right, the relational aspect. And I think it's easy for us to get caught up in the details of theology and what we believe about all sorts of things. And I know that the world is complicated. There's no doubt about that. But underlying it all is the love of God. This is what Jesus says, actually, when Pharisees ask him about the law. He answers, all of it hangs from two simple commandments: love God and love yourself as your neighbor. And actually, funny enough, in Luke, when he gives that answer, someone asks him, who is my neighbor? And he follows it up with the parable of the Good Samaritan. So we have two examples of Samaritans. The Good Samaritan shows the Samaritan as the one showing love. And in this passage, the Samaritan is the one receiving God's love and showing authentic thankfulness